It happened so fast I didn't even have time to scream. One moment, my 17-year-old disabled daughter, Lily, was adjusting the blanket on her wheelchair outside our driveway, and the next, HOA Karen came storming out of her house with a chainsaw roaring like a monster, sparks flying as the blade scraped the concrete. Neighbors froze mid-step, phones slipped from hands, and the entire street turned into a nightmare as Karen lowered her head and charged straight at Lily, full speed, eyes wild, like she had lost every piece of humanity she ever had. I ran, legs shaking, lungs burning, watching that spinning blade stretch closer, 10 inches, 6, 4. I could already hear Lily's final terrified cry. But just as the chainsaw was about to reach her, someone slammed into Karen from behind, tackling her so hard the chainsaw flew out of her hands and skidded across the street. Before the story begins, I want to ask you something straight from the heart. AAP Mary video Kiss Country or Kiss City se dek rahi ho? Nache comment Karen, because I truly love knowing where my audience is watching from. And if you're new here, please subscribe before we start, because what happened to my family is something every parent, every neighbor, every human needs to hear. After that horrifying moment you just witnessed, let me take you back to the calm, quiet life we thought we had. We moved to this peaceful suburban neighborhood for my daughter Lily, who has been disabled since birth and relies on her wheelchair for every movement. She loved the breeze, the birds, the sound of neighbors mowing their lawns, until HOA Karen moved in across the street. From day one, she made it her mission to make our lives miserable. First, it was petty complaints. Lily's wheelchair ramp was an eyesore, her therapy sessions were too loud, and our wind chimes were unacceptable. Then came the threats of fines, the constant notes on our door, the aggressive stares whenever Lily rolled outside for fresh air. We felt watched, judged, slowly suffocated by a woman who seemed to despise the very sight of a vulnerable child. I tried to stay calm, tried to reason, tried to keep peace for Lily's sake, but Karen escalated every single week, as if feeding off the discomfort she caused. Neighbors whispered, avoided her, but no one expected what she would eventually do. No one imagined she would cross a line so dark, so violent, so unthinkable, that it would almost cost my daughter her life. And that terrifying moment didn't come out of nowhere, it had been building, inch by inch, with every cruel act Karen threw at us. The first real trigger, the moment everything began spiraling into darkness, started on a warm Saturday morning that should have been peaceful, joyful, normal, but instead became the first sign that HOA Karen wasn't just controlling, she was dangerous. Lily had just returned from her weekly physical therapy session, the one she always looked forward to because her therapist, Miss Jenna, played soft music that made Lily laugh while she practiced moving her hands and stretching her legs. We parked in the driveway, lowered the wheelchair ramp, and just as Lily rolled down, smiling at the sunshine, Karen stormed across the street as if she'd been watching us from behind her blinds the entire time. She didn't say hello, didn't even breathe normally, she marched straight toward the ramp, pointed at it like it was a criminal offense, and shouted, "This is against HOA standards. You can't just install things without permission." Her voice was shrill, shaking, almost gleeful with anger, and Lily immediately recoiled, gripping her seat handles. I calmly explained that the ADA allowed accessibility modifications without needing HOA approval, and that her information was incorrect, but Karen wouldn't listen. She kept circling the ramp like a vulture, snapping photos, muttering, "Disgusting, ugly, ruining the neighborhood." That was the first time I felt a protective fire ignite inside me. But I stayed respectful, because Lily hated tension. Karen stomped away, but not before yelling over her shoulder, "You'll hear from me again." And she kept her promise. 2 days later, we received our first violation notice, accusing us of making excessive noise during Lily's therapy, noise that was nothing more than soft music and Lily's gentle laughter. The absurdity would have been laughable if it didn't hurt so deeply. My daughter, a disabled child who already struggled with confidence, became afraid to laugh in her own home. She asked me quietly, "Mom, am I bothering the neighbors?" And that question broke me in ways Karen would never understand. Then came the second notice, your wheelchair ramp obstructs community harmony. Harmony? Lily's ramp was her lifeline, her freedom. But Karen wasn't done. She started standing on her porch every time Lily went outside, arms crossed, glaring so intensely that Lily began asking to stay indoors. She loved the sun, the smell of the wind, the sound of birds, but Karen's hostile presence stole that from her. One afternoon, Lily was coloring on the porch, humming softly while I trimmed flowers, and suddenly Karen walked right up to the edge of our lawn and snapped, "Your daughter should not be on community property without supervision." I told her I was right there, but Karen insisted Lily's wheelchair left tire tracks on HOA grass and that she would file another complaint. Lily's eyes filled with shame, shame she should never have felt. It continued for weeks, Karen deliberately parking her car too close to our driveway, blocking the ramp, Karen filing false noise complaints, Karen knocking loudly on our door to remind us of fabricated rules. She even left a letter taped to our door saying, "Some children need to stay inside for the sake of neighborhood peace." That letter nearly made me collapse. Lily found it before I could stop her, and the way she looked at me, hurt, confused, frightened, haunts me still. I took the letter to the HOA board, but they shrugged, afraid of Karen because she was loud, aggressive, and had bullied half the neighborhood into silence. Meanwhile, Lily's anxiety grew. At night, she asked if Karen would come into our home. During therapy, she kept checking the windows. Whenever she heard a car door slam outside, she tensed. My child, the sweetest soul who never harmed anyone, was being emotionally terrorized by a woman obsessed with control. And I kept asking myself, why? Why target a disabled teenager? Why attack a family who had done nothing wrong? Why did her eyes burn with something more than anger, something closer to hatred? We tried to ignore her. Tried to avoid her. Tried to protect Lily's peace. But everything changed the day Karen blocked the wheelchair ramp with 2 trash bins heavy with wet leaves and rocks. Lily's therapy van had arrived, and she couldn't get out. When I confronted Karen, she stared straight into my eyes and said in a chillingly calm voice, "You people don't belong here, your daughter disrupts things." That sentence was the final line, the first real sign that Karen's hatred wasn't about rules or noise or ramps. It was personal. Ugly. Dangerous. And from that day onward, the air on our street shifted. Neighbors whispered, watched, pretended not to see the hostility, too afraid of Karen's wrath. Lily's world became smaller. Our anxiety became heavier. And Karen's obsession, darker. What none of us knew then was that this was just the beginning. The first spark of a fire that would explode into the unimaginable moment when she would return, not with complaints or letters, but with a chainsaw in her hands. The day the chainsaw incident began felt strangely calm, almost deceptive, as if the universe had gone quiet before a storm none of us could see coming. Lily was sitting on the porch wrapped in her blue blanket, enjoying the gentle morning breeze while I prepared her lunch inside, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed relaxed, until Karen's front door slammed so violently it echoed through the entire neighborhood like a starting gun. I peeked out the window just in time to see her pacing back and forth on her driveway, muttering to herself, her hair wild, her breathing sharp, like someone who had been teetering on the edge for far too long and finally tipped over it. She kept glancing toward our house, toward Lily, with a look that made my blood run cold, wild, hateful, unhinged. At first, I thought she was just gearing up for another confrontation, another complaint, another round of screaming about imaginary rule violations, but then she suddenly marched into her garage, leaving the door wide open. I heard it before I saw it, the unmistakable metallic clank of tools, drawers slamming, objects falling to the floor. Then a sound that froze me in place, the rattling pull of a chainsaw starter cord. Once. Twice. Then a sputter. And then, the deafening roar as the chainsaw came alive, its blade spinning fast enough to slice through anything in its path. I ran to the porch, heart pounding, and saw Karen emerge from the dark garage like something dragged out of a nightmare, holding the chainsaw with both hands, the engine screaming so loudly even the birds scattered from the trees. Neighbors peeked through blinds and curtains, some stepping outside in confusion, expecting maybe yard work or a tree trimming, but that illusion shattered when Karen revved the blade against the concrete, sending sparks flying like fireworks. Lily flinched in her wheelchair, gripping her blanket as the sound vibrated through her chest. I shouted for Karen to stop, asked her what she was doing, begged her to put it down, but she didn't even hear me, or maybe she did and didn't care. Instead, she turned her head slowly, eyes locking onto Lily with a gaze so murderous I felt my legs weaken. She took a step forward, tightening her grip, and for a moment everything felt suspended in air. The wind stopped, the world faded, and all I could hear was the chainsaw roaring and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, without warning, Karen bent slightly forward like a sprinter at starting position, and she charged. She didn't walk, didn't threaten, didn't scream, she ran, full speed, the chainsaw ripping through the air as she aimed it directly at my disabled daughter who couldn't move, couldn't run, couldn't protect herself. I screamed Lily's name and sprinted toward her, but adrenaline makes seconds feel like water. You run but your body feels slow, heavy, trapped. Lily's face contorted in terror as she tried to push her wheelchair back, but the wheels caught on the porch edge. Karen kept coming, faster, each step pounding the pavement, the blade now inches from being splattered with my daughter's blood. Neighbors began shouting, some frozen in shock, others fumbling for phones, but no one got close enough in time. I could see it, Lily's death, rushing toward us like a bullet. But then, from behind Karen, out of nowhere, a figure sprinted from across the street, a tall man in a dark hoodie, face shadowed, running with a speed and determination that didn't feel normal. In one explosive motion, he lunged forward and tackled Karen with a force that knocked the chainsaw out of her grip, sending it skidding across the pavement in a shower of sparks. Karen hit the ground hard, shrieking in rage like an animal as the mysterious man pinned her down, shouting for me to get Lily inside. His voice was deep, urgent, unfamiliar, but full of authority, like someone who'd trained for chaos before. I grabbed Lily's wheelchair and pushed her toward the door, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the handle. Behind us, Karen thrashed under the stranger's hold, screaming Lily's name like she was possessed. Neighbors finally rushed closer, some calling police, others helping restrain Karen as she kicked and clawed, her face twisted with a fury I'd never witnessed in a human being. The man who saved Lily kept his knee on Karen's back until she stopped struggling, breathing heavily as he finally lifted his hood. And that was the moment everything shifted, the moment I looked into the eyes of the person who had just risked his life to save my daughter, someone I had never seen before in my life, yet someone who somehow already knew exactly who Karen was, and exactly what she was capable of. The moment the chainsaw skidded across the pavement and Karen was tackled to the ground, my entire body collapsed into a shaking mess I couldn't control, the world around me blurred, my ears rang, and all I could think about was Lily's terrified scream echoing in my skull as if it had embedded itself into my bones. Inside the house, I locked the door with trembling hands while Lily clung to me, her face pale, her lips shaking, tears falling silently, not the loud crying of a teenager, but the silent, traumatized kind that breaks a parent more than words ever could. She kept asking in a fragile voice, "Mom, why did she try to kill me?" And I didn't have an answer, because the truth was too monstrous. Karen didn't see Lily as a child, or a person, or a neighbor, she saw her as something to erase. As I held her in my arms, I felt guilt choking me, guilt for not running fast enough, guilt for not predicting Karen's madness, guilt for not protecting Lily from the emotional torment Karen had been inflicting for months. And outside, the sirens grew louder, neighbors gathered in clumps on their lawns, whispering, speculating, staring at our house with wide eyes, while others hovered around Karen on the pavement as if they were watching the aftermath of a car crash they couldn't look away from. When the police finally arrived, the tension cracked the air like lightning. Officers rushed to restrain Karen, who had switched from feral rage to theatrical innocence within seconds. She started sobbing dramatically, claiming the chainsaw slipped, that she was just trimming her tree branches, and that the mysterious man attacked her without reason. She pointed toward our porch, insisting Lily had rolled towards her property line and nearly caused her to lose balance, twisting the story with the confidence of someone who had lied her whole life and gotten away with it. I ran outside and shouted the truth, but my voice came out as a desperate, trembling plea, making me sound like I was the unstable one. Neighbors tried sticking up for us, but some were too scared to get involved, afraid of Karen's wrath, afraid of HOA drama, afraid of ruining their own peace. And the mysterious man who saved Lily, the only person who could confirm everything, stood silently, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark with emotion, but he refused to give Karen any space for manipulation. She charged at the girl, he said firmly, but Karen laughed, actually laughed, and demanded he be arrested for assaulting her. The officers looked torn, confused, trying to separate chaos from truth while Karen performed her innocence like a twisted stage actor. At one point, Lily, still shaking in her wheelchair, whispered, "Mom, is she going to come back?" And that single question made something inside me crack open. After giving statements, after neighbors tried to tell the police what they saw, after Karen screamed, cried, lied, gaslit, and twisted every detail, no arrest was made. The officers said they didn't have enough evidence of intent, that it could have been a misunderstanding, and that the chainsaw wasn't used on anyone, despite it being inches from my child's body. Karen walked back to her house, brushing dust off her clothes as if she'd simply tripped during gardening, shooting Lily a smile so cold it felt like a blade. I watched her disappear through her front door while my knees threatened to give out. I had never felt so powerless in my life. The community remained in shock, half whispering, half hiding. Some neighbors left baked goods at our door, others texted silently, too scared to publicly take sides. Lily refused to go outside, refused to sit on the porch, refused to even look through the windows. She started trembling whenever she heard a lawnmower because the rumbling reminded her of the chainsaw. She slept in my bed that night, clutching my arms so tightly her fingers went numb, and every time she drifted off, she jerked awake with a startled gasp. I barely slept either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's face, deranged, determined, unstoppable. The next morning, as if nothing had happened, Karen stood on her porch watering her plants with a smile, greeting joggers, waving at dog walkers, pretending she hadn't tried to murder a disabled child the day before. She glanced toward our window and smirked, a slow, knowing twist of her lips that said clearly, "You can't stop me." The police had left. The neighbors had retreated. And Karen was sending a message: she would not face consequences. Not yet. And that realization, combined with the trauma, the helplessness, the terror of nearly losing Lily, hit me all at once, sending me into a quiet, suffocating emotional collapse that lasted days. My hands shook every time I touched the front door. My chest tightened whenever footsteps echoed outside. I felt like we were trapped in our own home, held hostage by a predator who lived 20 feet away and knew the system well enough to twist it in her favor. But beneath all that fear, something else began to grow, a cold, determined anger that would eventually push me to dig into Karen's past, to uncover truths no one expected, and to reveal the darkness she'd been hiding long before the chainsaw ever touched her hands. After the chainsaw incident, when the police failed us and the neighborhood retreated back into their quiet fear, I found myself pacing the living room night after night, unable to sit still, unable to breathe normally, unable to accept that someone had tried to kill my daughter and walked away with a smirk, free, unpunished, and lurking right across the street. Lily slept beside me each night, trembling whenever she heard the wind or a distant engine roar, whispering that Karen might come back with something worse, and the helplessness shredded me inside until I finally broke down in the kitchen one evening, tears blurring my eyes as I whispered, "Why us? Why Lily?" That's when the mysterious man who had saved Lily, whose name I still didn't know, knocked on our door. When I opened it, he stood there with a haunted expression, as if he'd been wrestling with a decision all day. He introduced himself as Marcus, a new renter on our street who'd moved in only 3 weeks ago, and said something that made my blood freeze: "I didn't step in by accident. I've been watching Karen. She's dangerous. And I think this wasn't the first time she tried something like this. His voice was low, steady, but heavy with secrets he hadn't yet revealed. We sat at the dining table while Lily rested in the next room, and Marcus unfolded a story that made my skin crawl. Back in his previous neighborhood, 3 towns away, Karen had lived there too, under a slightly different name, Karen Elwood, instead of Karen Elmore. 1 letter changed, 1 letter hidden. According to him, she'd been forced to leave after a series of incidents the HOA never fully explained. There had been a violent altercation involving a neighbor's young son, mysterious damage to another family's accessibility ramp, and a night where Karen reportedly chased a teen girl with a metal rake after an argument about noise. The HOA had covered everything under community disagreements, and Karen had quietly left before any legal action took place. Marcus's own cousin had lived on that street. He had been the one to warn Marcus when he moved here. Keep an eye on the woman with the blonde hair and fake smile, his cousin had said. She thrives in neighborhoods where the HOA is weak. As he spoke, I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms. Everything suddenly made sense: the manipulation, the boldness, the arrogance, the constant targeting of vulnerable kids. But Marcus leaned in further, lowering his voice. There's something else. Something I found in her trash. My breath caught. He pulled out his phone and showed me photos, pictures he had taken days before the chainsaw attack. They showed sketches of our house, detailed notes about our daily schedule, Lily's therapy timings, the exact minutes Lily spent outdoors, and a chilling line scribbled at the top of a page: remove the disturbance. My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. This wasn't spontaneous rage. This wasn't a moment of madness. Karen had been planning this. Watching us. Studying us. Waiting. Marcus swiped to another image, this one a screenshot of a post Karen had made years ago on a private HOA Facebook group. Her words were venom: children like that shouldn't be allowed in HOA communities. They lower property value and disrupt visual harmony. Underneath her post, several members had reported her, and the group shut down the thread, but Karen doubled down by messaging parents directly. Some moved away shortly after that. I covered my mouth as bile rose in my throat. Karen wasn't just a bully, she was a predator who had targeted disabled children before. Marcus continued, explaining how he had seen her watching Lily multiple times, how she took photos whenever Lily's wheelchair rolled onto the porch, how she wrote notes every night around 9 p.m., staring at our house like she was cataloging a threat instead of observing a child. Then came the biggest twist, one that made the room spin around me. Marcus said that 2 nights before the chainsaw attack, he'd seen Karen dragging a heavy metal toolbox from her garage into her backyard, muttering angrily to herself. Curiosity had led him to peek over his fence, and he found her assembling something he couldn't identify: parts of machinery, metal rods, even a small motor. At the time, he thought she might be building a lawn tool. But after the attack, he realized what he had witnessed. Karen had been preparing the chainsaw for days: oil stains, sharpened teeth, tension adjustments. She had tested it in the backyard long before she ran at Lily with it. Karen hadn't snapped, she had escalated. And her past showed she always escalated. I felt my throat close as I whispered, why would she do this? Why target a child? Marcus hesitated, then swiped to one last photo, a document he found half-shredded in her trash bin. It was an HOA complaint she'd written but never submitted, listing reasons to evict unfit families, citing Lily's wheelchair as visual pollution. But at the bottom of the page, handwritten in Karen's scrawl, were the words that nearly made me throw up: children like her don't belong here. I will fix this neighborhood myself. The note made everything inside me shake. This wasn't pettiness. It wasn't irritation. It was hatred, deep, ugly, targeted hatred. We sat in silence for what felt like an hour. The house felt colder, smaller. Lily's soft breathing from the next room sounded fragile, like something that needed constant guarding. When I finally looked up at Marcus, he met my eyes with a seriousness that sent a chill through me. "She's not done," he said quietly. "People like her don't stop after failing once. They try again. And next time, she won't use a chainsaw. She'll find something else." Those words wrapped around my chest like a vice. That night, as I checked every lock on every door, as Lily slept curled against my arm, as the street outside fell into a deceptive calm, I realized the terrifying truth: the chainsaw incident was only the beginning. And the real war, the one that would expose Karen completely, was about to start. The night confrontation began on a quiet evening that felt unnervingly still, the kind of stillness that presses against your skin like a warning, and from the moment I put Lily to bed, I felt something wrong in the air, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The house was dim, the street outside silent except for the occasional whisper of wind, and I sat in the living room clutching my phone, waiting for Marcus to arrive because we had agreed to gather more evidence the next day. But as the clock neared midnight, I heard it, a faint, deliberate crunch of gravel from outside the window, not the scattered footsteps of a passing jogger or neighbor's dog walker, but the slow, intentional steps of someone moving with purpose. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs as I peered through the window blinds, and the sight made my blood run cold. Karen was standing in front of our house, her face partially lit by the dim street lamp, her hair wild, her eyes gleaming with a kind of sick determination that sent a jolt of terror straight through me. She wasn't holding a chainsaw this time, but in her right hand was something just as terrifying, a long, metal crowbar, the end of it glinting like a blade. She stared at our front door with a hatred so intense it felt like a physical force. I lunged for my phone to call 911, but before I could dial, there was a loud, ear-splitting bang as Karen slammed the crowbar against the front door with brutal strength, the wood cracking under the force. Lily jolted awake upstairs, screaming my name, and the sound of her fear fueled something primal in me. I ran toward the stairs, yelling for her to stay in her room and lock the door while Karen hammered the crowbar into the door again, each strike splintering it further. "You can't hide her forever!" Karen shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. Neighborhoods like this were never meant for kids like her. The words tore through the walls like knives. I grabbed the fireplace poker, the only thing I could get my hands on, and positioned myself between the door and the staircase. My arms trembled, but my eyes stayed locked on the cracking wood, every muscle ready to fight for my daughter's life. Then, just as Karen lifted the crowbar for another blow, a dark figure burst around the corner of the house with the speed of a bullet: Marcus. He tackled Karen so hard she dropped the crowbar, which clattered across the concrete. She screamed, clawing at him, kicking wildly, but Marcus pinned her to the ground, shouting for me to call the police. My fingers shook as I dialed, my voice breaking as I explained that Karen was attempting to break in, that she was armed, that she had threatened my daughter. Karen kept thrashing, spit flying as she screamed, "I'm fixing this neighborhood. I'm fixing it," and the way she emphasized it made me realize she didn't see Lily as a human being, she saw her as a problem, something to fix, something to erase. When the police arrived minutes later, sirens slicing through the night, neighbors spilled out of their homes in shock, some holding their children, others filming with trembling hands. Officers swarmed Karen, who instantly switched from violent frenzy to sobbing desperation, crying that she thought she heard someone inside our home, that she feared for our safety, that she only brought the crowbar for protection. But Marcus cut her off, his voice sharp and steady. She was breaking in. She was going after Lily. I heard her from across the street. Even with the officer's hands on her, Karen twisted her head toward me, her face contorted into a smile that chilled me to my core. "Your daughter ruins everything," she hissed, "but she won't ruin my life." In that moment, something snapped inside me, not fear, not desperation, but a roaring, protective fire that drowned out every trembling part of my body. I stepped closer, my hands shaking, my voice shaking even more, but I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You will never touch her again." Karen's smile faltered. The police, finally seeing her for what she truly was, cuffed her and pulled her to her feet as she screamed, her voice echoing down the street like a nightmare refusing to die. Lily, still crying upstairs, called out for me, and I rushed to her room, holding her as she sobbed into my shoulder, whispering that she thought Karen had come to finish what she started. I told her she was safe now, but deep down I wasn't sure, because people like Karen don't just stop. They break, they scheme, they wait, they strike again. As Karen was shoved into the police car, Marcus stood beside me, breathing heavily, his clothes covered in dirt from the struggle. "This isn't over," he said quietly, "but tonight, you saved her. And I saved you." I stared at Karen through the window of the patrol car as she glared back with venom, and in that moment, under the flashing red-blue lights, I knew the truth. The only way to protect Lily was to expose Karen completely, to bring every dark thing she'd ever done into the light. And the battle for justice was just beginning. The morning after Karen's attempted break-in, the entire neighborhood felt different, not safer, not calmer, but charged, like every home was silently bracing for the truth that had finally exploded into the open. Police cars lined the street, officers going door to door gathering statements, and for once, people didn't stay quiet. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak before came forward in waves, sharing their own encounters with Karen, her threats, her harassment, the way she'd stalked families with vulnerable children, the letters she'd slipped under doors, the way she'd scream at anyone who didn't bow to her imagined authority. One woman, trembling as she spoke, admitted Karen had slashed her son's basketball because he bounced it too loud. Another neighbor revealed security footage of Karen yelling at their autistic nephew, telling him he didn't belong here. And Marcus, steady, calm, determined, handed over the photos he'd taken of Karen's notes, the sketches of our house. The horrifying line, "Remove the disturbance," and the partially shredded complaint she'd written about evicting families with disabled children. The officers' expressions shifted from confusion to disgust to anger. They realized they weren't looking at misunderstandings or neighborly disputes, they were looking at a pattern, years long, of targeted aggression and escalating violence. Meanwhile, the HOA board, usually more concerned with grass height and mailbox colors, was forced into an emergency meeting as half the neighborhood crowded the clubhouse demanding action. People brought evidence, screenshots, voice memos, saved letters. Karen had harassed nearly everyone, but no one had ever compared their experiences until now. Seeing it laid out, piece by piece, painted a monster far worse than any of us had imagined. The HOA president, his hands shaking as he read through the collected complaints, announced that Karen was being removed from the HOA, fined heavily, and banned from attending any community meeting again. But the justice didn't stop there. As the police pieced together Karen's past, from her former neighborhood where she had gone by Elwood, to the violent incidents she'd escaped accountability for, they discovered something chilling: multiple records of investigations that were dropped due to insufficient evidence, all involving families with disabled children, all involving Karen. It became clear this wasn't a one-time meltdown, this was a pattern of hatred Karen had carried for years. The district attorney, after reviewing Marcus's evidence, Lily's testimony, given through tears but with bravery that crushed my heart, and the statements from the neighbors, decided to escalate Karen's charges beyond trespassing and attempted break-in. She was charged with attempted aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, terroristic threats, and premeditation due to the detailed planning documented in her notes. When officers came for Karen the second time, this time with an arrest warrant instead of hesitation, she didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't pretend to faint. She just glared at our house, her lips curling into that same cold smile she'd given me the night of the chainsaw attack, but this time, she wasn't the one in control. She was handcuffed, placed into the back of the patrol car, and driven away as the entire neighborhood watched in silence, some cheering quietly, others shaking in relief. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt air enter my lungs without pain. But the true moment of justice came later, in a courtroom packed with families Karen had hurt, some from our street, some from her previous neighborhoods, all ready to speak the truth she'd buried for years. As the prosecutor laid out her pattern of targeting disabled children, manipulating HOAs, and escalating into near-deadly violence, Karen's composure cracked. She tried denying everything, accusing Marcus of stalking her, claiming Lily threw herself into dangerous situations for attention, but no one believed her anymore. When Lily rolled forward to give her statement, her voice trembling, her hands shaking but her eyes brave, I felt tears spill down my cheeks. "I didn't do anything to her," she said softly. "I just wanted to play outside. I just wanted to live." Silence filled the courtroom. Even the judge's eyes softened. And when the verdict came, guilty on all major counts, the weight that had been crushing our home for months finally lifted. Karen was sentenced to years in prison, mandatory psychiatric evaluation, and a restraining order that forbade her from ever coming near us again. The day she was taken away in the prison van, the neighborhood felt reborn. People brought flowers to our porch, kids chalk-painted messages like, "We love you, Lily," and neighbors who once stayed silent now stood together, promising they would never let anything like this happen again. The sun felt warmer. The air felt lighter. And for the first time in months, Lily asked to sit outside again. We wheeled her onto the porch, and when she felt the breeze on her face, she closed her eyes and smiled, a real smile, not the guarded one she'd been forcing since the attack. Marcus visited that evening, standing at the edge of the porch with that quiet strength he always carried. "You both did it," he said. "You faced her. You exposed her. You won." But I shook my head, placing my hand over his. "We didn't do it alone. You saved her. Twice." Lily lifted her hand and reached for Marcus, whispering, "Thank you for helping my mom save me." He knelt beside her, his voice thick with emotion, and said, "You saved yourself by surviving. That's the bravest thing anyone has ever done." As the sky turned orange and the neighborhood settled into peaceful stillness, I realized something profound. Justice wasn't just Karen being taken away, it was reclaiming our home, our safety, our future. And watching Lily laugh softly as the wind brushed her hair, I knew the darkness was finally behind us, and the light ahead would never be stolen from her again. If you've stayed with me through this journey, I want to ask you from my heart, AAP Mary Video Kiss Country or Kiss City Se Dek Rahi Ho? Please comment below. I truly love knowing where my family of viewers comes from. And if you're new here, subscribe right now, because stories like this remind us why we must stand together, speak up, and protect those who can't always protect themselves. Your support means everything. And remember, every child deserves safety, love, and a community willing to fight for them. Let's be that community, together.